Bonjour et bienvenue à tous et à toutes. Nous sommes heureux de vous accueillir à une nouvelle session d'atelier de la série Boîte et outils en sciences humaines numériques. Je suis Jada Watson, coordinatrice des sciences humaines numériques à l'Université d'Ottawa. Au cours de cette session, nous explorons comment apprendre, analyser et construire des relations dans et à travers nos recherches. Good morning and welcome to a new session of the DH Toolbox series. I'm Jada Watson, coordinator of Digital Humanities at the University of Ottawa, and I'm really excited to bring to you a series centered on learning, analyzing, and building relationships through our research. Before we begin today, I'd like to start our session with an Indigenous land affirmation. Nous rendons hommage au peuple algonquin, gardien traditionnel de cette terre. Nous reconnaissons le lien sacré de longue date l'unissant à ce territoire qui demeure non cédé. Nous rendons également hommage à tous les peuples autochtones qui habitent Ottawa, qu'ils soient de la région ou d'ailleurs au Canada. Nous reconnaissons les gardiens des savoirs traditionnels, jeunes et âgés. Nous honorons aussi leurs courageux dirigeants d'hier, d'aujourd'hui et de demain. We pay respect to the Algonquin people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. Thank you for joining us today. So, have you ever been taught how to read like an academic? How to take notes? How to build anything from them? Because we sure as heck didn't. I'm really excited about this workshop because I'm sure, like many of you, I've collected many notebooks over the years with notes and doodles and brainstorms, and sometimes I just don't know what to do with them. I've tried note-taking in Excel, in Zotero, on paper, and sometimes these methods don't seem helpful at all. So when Shawn proposed this topic, I jumped at it. Dr. Shawn Graham, who's going to present for us today, is a digital archaeologist and digital humanist in the Department of History at Carleton University. In 2016, he won a Provost Fellowship and Teaching Award and was designated a Carleton University Teaching Fellow. He recently was awarded Shirk Insight Grant for a project called The Bone Trade, studying the online trade in human remains with machine learning and neural networks. And you can visit the project website at bonetrade.github.io. In July 2020, he published An Enchantment of Digital Archaeology, Raising the Dead with Agent-Based Models, Archaeogaming, I might have pronounced that wrong, Shawn, you're going to have to correct me, and Artificial Intelligence. And the year before, he published one of my favorite books, Failing Gloriously and Other Essays, which I strongly encourage everyone to pick up. It's always a joy to have Shawn with us today, who is always willing to jump in at the last minute and test drive new tools with us. So please welcome Shawn.
Thank you, Jada. That was very kind. So I have two monitors set up here in the digital archaeology basement layer. And so if you see me doing this all the time, it's because I'm looking at my slides, which are on this other machine. And my slides are actually online right now. Jada's going to drop the link into the chat so that you can have the slides for yourself. There are links embedded in them. The slides are made with reveal.js through Obsidian, the note-taking thing that I am going to talk about in a moment. But I'm glad that Jada mentioned failing gloriously, because I have no idea, frankly, how to take notes. I was never taught how to take notes. You know, when we teach, you know, we assign essays and so on, and we don't teach how to write very often. We just expect that with exposure, it will eventually transmogrify from my brain out into your brain, and you will learn how to write properly. Same with academic reading. And I actually forgot about the whole reading like an academic thing, Jada, so I'm just going to talk about notes. But we also never, or at least I was never, taught how to take notes. So when Jada said, Shawn, we have another series coming up, is there something that you're working on that you can share with us? I was at that precise moment trying to deal with some notes that I was doing with my RAs. And so I said, yeah, note taking. And then, of course, once you propose something, you have to actually make it happen. And so in the course of making it happen, I actually started on another whole round of trying to really be mindful and think through what the hell it is that I do. And it's been it's been very, very helpful. So my aim today is not how to tell, it's not to tell you, you know, this is, here is the word of Shawn. This is how you take notes. I'm not doing that. Or how, you know, or show you cool tools, although I'll you know, do that. But what I'm aiming to do is to get you mindful about how the tools or approaches that you are using right now affect your thinking. Okay, so this is the archaeologist coming out in me, that the way that we use tools affects the way we are human, the way we think, and it's this reciprocal relationship. So I'm going to tell you the story of how I screwed up a whole bunch of things and how I've kind of started moving towards something that, if not a good system, makes me excited to sit down and read and take notes. And really, if we can't get excited about the little things in our work, then how are we ever going to get thinking more about it? So I guess I've got the screen share on and you can see the title slide, right? Jada, people can see that? Right, perfect. Okay, so I have always muddled through, okay? I wasn't in academia for a long time. After I graduated with a PhD, I did a whole bunch of other things. And so what skills that I had in terms of research process and note taking really were pretty atrophied, you know, especially for taking meaningful notes. I still read a lot, I still wrote a lot, but I didn't have a note-taking habit that was meaningful. I mean, for my PhD itself, I had book after book of dead notes where I, you know, dutifully copied out interesting passages and scribbled things, and then stickies and all sorts of stuff, which I lugged around each house that I lived in, and they're still sitting in the back here, and they don't do a damn lick of good. So when I started at Carleton, when the new guy starts, you give them the classes that nobody else wants to teach. And in our case, that happened to be a class on the historian's craft. But I didn't talk about note-taking there. I talked about, okay, this is oral history, this is, you know, da-da-da-da-da. But that started to change when I met a fellow named Hollis. Now, Hollis is a smart guy. Hollis was in my class. And Hollis, you know, the everyday ableism of academia really hit home here. And working with Hollis, you know, if I were any good, I would have been thinking about this long before I ever met Hollis. But Hollis has a limited range of movement because of his illness. And so when Hollis was writing for me in my class, I said to him, Hollis, how are you doing this? Where, you know, your citations are kind of off. It's not connecting for me. He says, well, I get a book, and if it's an audio book, I listen to it. If it's an ebook, I try and read it. And then I have to remember everything and put it all down in Word, because he can't have a physical book open, can't have more than one thing open at a time because of the different aids, screen readers and so on. And he was holding it all in his head and trying to put all of the notes down. I said, there's got to be a better way of doing this, Hollis. And so we started looking, and one of the things that we, you know, working together, really starting to think about workflow, because if it would work for Hollis, it'll work for the rest of us, right? So, you know, this ties into principles of universal design. If you design for everybody, it works so much better. So this sparked an interest in me in, you know, how do we take notes? How do we do our research? How does this all work? And my conversation and working with Hollis brought us in the first place to a fork of notational velocity by Bert Terpstra called NVAlt. And what's nice about this tool, and especially for Hollis, was that creating a note and searching for a note and reading a note all took place in the same pane. So with his keyboard, Hollis could start typing, and we would very quickly find either the idea that he had had before, or a blank canvas. Oh, okay, well then we can put stuff in there. And so just this one tool was a game changer for Hollis's ability to take notes, and for my own, right? This tool, you know, the library is a tool, a book is a tool. All of these things are technologies, and all of them disable people because they are not designed with ideas of universal access. Hollis is in a wheelchair. The fact that the books are up on the set at 7 feet above the ground or 6 feet above the ground, it's not Hollis, it's the library. The library does the disabling. Similarly, the digital tools, if they're not designed with universal design principles in mind, they do a lot of disabling. Now, this isn't a talk about universal design, and I haven't really thought that thought through. I've let my mouth get away from me. So if there are any of my students in the audience, this will feel very familiar. So I started with my own work with notational velocity. Now, as I've alluded to, you know, that was, oh my gosh, that's almost 12 years ago now. And so I've been really trying. I love a good gadget. I love a good new tool. I've been keeping track of this kind of thing on Electric Archaeology, which is my blog. And I was encouraged to blog my process and things that I was doing by Alan Liu back in 2006. So for this presentation, I went and took a look at the blog to see, okay, what have I written about note-taking? Well, in the last 10 years, I've written over 20 posts and several thousand words trying to come up with the shining process. I still haven't found what I'm looking for, perhaps. So, you know, NVAlt seems quite simple, but over the last 10 years, things have gotten way more complex, right? This is a screenshot of the Automator workflow that I have, because I also encountered Scrivener in this time. And the way Scrivener works with the metaphor of the note card, and you put one thought in it and then you can rearrange things, that totally works with the scattered way my brain works. And so I got really excited, and I developed this Automator script to liberate my notes from the database inside NVAlt into other formats and transform and move. And yeah, there are way too many moving pieces. Like, if you go looking on the interwebs for people discussing their note-taking process and you start seeing more than maybe 3 steps in their process, back away, back away. It's just never going to stick, right? So Electric Archaeology is filled with this kind of stuff. And for a while, I was trying to even get into the open notebook scene, right? Keep my research notes fully open. And I was inspired on this on 2 counts, right? So there's Caleb McDaniel's research wiki for his notes while writing The Sweet Taste of Liberty, which won the Pulitzer Prize. And hell, if it's good enough for Pulitzer, it's good enough for Shawn, right? And worked from the open science side of things. So people, Ben Marwick, some of his students, Carl Bodecker, different people keeping their process and their experiments online. So I started trying to do that too, but it's exhausting and it's not sustainable. And Jekyll is awful, right? So it wasn't really working. And I'm a bald white dude on the internet. I can put stuff online and people aren't going to attack me for it. This is obviously a dangerous and stupid thing to do if you don't have the kind of security that I do. And especially if you're researching something, it's one thing for me to be putting open notes on about research in stamped Roman brick from the 1st to 3rd century in the Tiber Valley on the East Bank or the West Bank in the Sabina. Like, nobody cares, frankly. But if you are working on tracking online hate or pseudo-archaeology, or I don't know, trying to keep track of the siege in Ottawa right now by all of the right-wing wingnuts. That's not the sort of thing you put into an open research notebook. So I conflated the process of trying to keep notes to help me with my research with the goals of open science and that whole scene. And I think it's really important to split those two thoughts apart. It's one thing to share process. It's one thing to share an experiment. It's one thing to write a tutorial that says, hey, this really cool tool, this is how you use it. It's quite another thing to put your own thoughts and interpretations and thinking online in a venue where harm can happen. So open notebooks are not always safe and not always appropriate. But what is important out of this was at least the discipline of trying to think through what the hell is it that my notes do? And, you know, for all of these tools and experiments and this mad rushing off in many different directions over the last 10 years, my note-taking didn't improve an awful lot. It wasn't consistent and it was too much of a damn chore. But hope springs eternal. And I encountered the workflow of a PhD student, Dan Scheffler, who was documenting not so much his notes, but rather his flow. And that introduced me to the workflow of the sociologist Niklas Luhmann, who's famous for having written 60 books. And, you know, it has this famous system of note cards that fit inside a shoebox that organize. If you've ever encountered anything about Zettelkasten, well, that is where it comes from. But I was right into the nitty gritty. So I didn't even read very much about Niklas Luhmann. I was reading Scheffler and his workflow, and I was trying to replicate his workflow. So it involved Sublime Text, a bunch of plugins, a whole bunch of other supporting tools, a whole bunch of workflows. Like I already knew that I was no damn good in complex workflows, but here I jumped back into it again, seduced by the idea that maybe this time it will stick. And I kept trying to marry it with an online notebook, and it just wasn't working. You know, the question is, this is where I'm going to take a drink. You know, so again, there's a difference between being open about your process, detailing it where other folks can benefit or help critique improvement, and basic note-taking. The other thing that I realized through all of this series of fails is that note-taking is the writing. It is the writing. And three, if my notes get too complex, they're no damn good. The note has to equal one thought. And finally, the notes have to be useful. You have to be able to go back into them and see what you were thinking and how it might connect with something else. So you got to make connections, right? And of course, that is what a lot of the literature that builds on Luhmann says, but I had to learn that the hard way. And the other thing, if you accept all that, then notes are not a thing you make and they're not a thing you use, but rather it's an environment that you are in, right? I've been stuck in my freaking basement for the last 3 years. It is not a conducive environment to thinking, especially when the kids can't go to physical school and they're down here too, and we're all fighting for bandwidth, and it's a tiny house and the cat is barfed again and the dog needs to go outside. We know that physical environment has an impact on how we're able to think, right? Well, if the physical environment has that impact, then surely to God, the digital environment that we are in, right? The digital is the real world. So the answer to these questions, who am I doing this for and what do I want to achieve? Well, I want to make an environment that I'm happy to be in. And then I will be able to enjoy this process again. And if I'm enjoying this process again, I'm going to think much better thoughts. Angry Shawn is useless Shawn. And who am I doing this for? Well, obviously for myself. But it would be so much better if my students didn't have to go through this same process of trial and error, right? So I'm trying to now build this consciously into my teaching. And this past year, this current year rather, is the first time that I've really started to make that, it's always been there kind of in my teaching, but now it's like, it's a real firm, absolutely goal. I mean, the students I get in the fall, watch it, you're going to have some fun. My idea and their idea of fun might vary a bit. So this, of course, takes us to taking smart notes with Sonke Arons, right? And if you've spent any time at all in this space, you will have come across this, and you will have found people shilling and coming up with their own. And there's any number of YouTube videos, and there are any number of sites that promise you to do this method or that method. It really is not that complicated. And I like not that complicated. Again, the idea is you have to have an environment that you're happy to be in. And so this book gives you a lot of really good stuff. Do read it. And it's brilliant, not so much in what it suggests you ought to do or how to do it, but rather for what it, or at least I found that it made me reflect more on my own process. So I thought about what I wanted, and it seemed that what I wanted, and more or less the framework that Arons is suggesting here, coincided. And so here's the magic thing. Here's the too long didn't read, right? Your system, your environment should not only make it easy to find your notes quickly, it should also guide you to the relevant notes when you need them, even if you didn't search for them. It should help you clarify your thinking and let you experiment with ideas and spark new ones, right? And the more you use it, the more you want to use it, and the more value you get out of it. I would like to spend my days in an environment like that, right? That would be fun. I don't have colleagues anymore. I don't have anybody down the hall that I can shoot the shit with and bounce ideas off of. I've got the cat. He doesn't talk too much. So this helps offload some of the cognitive load of reading, of thinking like an academic, to a system that reflects it back to me. So I end up in a better dialogue with myself. I was going to make a talking to yourself joke, but I got nothing. However, this has clearly resonated with lots of people, and the scene has exploded in recent years, right? There are any number of tools that promise to link your thinking, give you a second brain, Zettelkasten in your eyes, and right? So you can do things with Sublime and Atom as text editors, any number of plugins. There's Sublimeless ZK, which is a Zettelkasten that is built on Sublime that doesn't use Sublime. There's Zettler, there's Rome, there's Tiddlywiki, there's the Archive, there's OrgRome, there's Notion, there's Craft, there's Obsidian. There's so much, and you can build your own. All you need are a series of text files. It's all it comes down to. It's just a framework for thinking. The core idea, though, that unites all of this stuff, one thought, one note, find the connections. Given that my PhD research was all about a network approach to considering material culture way back in the dawn of network analysis and archaeology, this kind of feels right. There's a nice sympathetic vibration here, kumbaya brings me back to where I began, sort of thing. Whenever you talk to a Zoom group and you make some kind of comment and you have no idea whether things land or not. So thank you, Jada, for remaining on the screen so that I can at least get a sense of whether or not something is landing.
Always. I actually feel like I'm in therapy, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I did something like this on MS Teams where there was absolutely no feedback at all. And it was just, talking to the choir now. Everybody's had that kind of experience. Anyways, all that to say, all of this stuff, it feels so new, but it's not. And Chris Aldrich, great blog, you should read it. Follow the link. I'm sorry for the messiness of the slide. My design skills suck, but such is life. He points out that a lot of this stuff is not, Lumen's had a really great system, really crystallized things, and people have drawn a lot of inspiration from that. But we've got commonplace books. We've got also, there's a long history of this stuff. A lot of the people building these new tools aren't even seemingly aware of, the Vannevar Bush and the memics and all of that sort of thing. So it would be interesting, this is an aside, it would be interesting to contextualize this current note-taking boom in the longer history of cognitive enhancement, right? You go all the way back to Cicero and memory palaces and so on, but that's just a thought for another day. Read the blog post, it's quite interesting. So, all righty then. I just pulled out my headphones so I can't hear if anybody's talking to me or not. Please do not adjust your set. So I'm using Obsidian, and I believe the developers for Obsidian are from Waterloo, Ontario. So yay, Canadian content. This is what I am using at the moment. And all that Obsidian is a discovery layer and a text editor that sits on top of a folder of simple text files. So all of your notes are just text files written with markdown conventions. So it's future-proof. You're not locked into a database, and you can open any of your files with another tool, Zettler, whatever, DevonThink, if you so desire, without affecting how you might use it with Obsidian. And it has a huge community of users who are building all sorts of plugins and extensions and using it for everything from keeping track of role-playing games as dungeon masters to personal diaries. Like, it is amazing, this stuff. And if I can throw one caveat at you all right now, don't wade into the plugin scene until you finally get your rhythm going with how you take notes, because that's how I lost all of 2021 in terms of my note taking. I jumped down a lot of plugins going, oh, this is so cool. And they are cool, but without a practice and structure and a little bit of discipline beforehand, the utility of Obsidian will be lost. Okay, so I'm gonna explain now how I've been using it with some of my students and how my most recent iteration with it. This background here is from the research vault that I am using with my RAs. So I have 3 different major projects going on, students working on it. Some are doing literature reviews, some are building stuff, some are out there on the web collecting information. I'm having them all dump it into an Obsidian vault that I use, that I am hosting in Dropbox. Strictly speaking, this is not best practice, because if 2 people edit the same note at the same time, you can get conflicts. So far, it hasn't really happened, and so I'm willing to run the risk. This is how you live dangerously as a digital humanities person. Feel the thrill. And in this is the graph view. So the colors are set right now for different projects I have. And when I see projects starting to overlap, that's an interesting thing. And so the graph lets me jump into it. But right now, if you're new to Obsidian, if you're new to all of this note-taking thing, the link here, a vault to get you started. Vault is just Obsidian speak for the folder in which you are keeping all of your notes. So when you download Obsidian and you start it up, it gives you 3 options. Option 1, start a new vault. Option 2, open an existing vault. 3, open the help vault. I strongly suggest you open the help vault and explore and play in that to get a sense of how this discovery layer, how this interface works. Then, instead of building a new vault from scratch, try mine out. This is the vault that I am currently using for my own research. This is the vault into which I am dumping all of the survivors of my previous experiments. And it uses, there's a logic to it. And if I return to my actual speaking notes, I will explain this in a way that makes sense instead of freewheeling. So going back to the script. Okay, so this is the vault that I've built for y'all, and it is a very simple vault. It comes, the most complex thing on it is integration with hypothesis. If you use Hypothesis for annotating PDFs on the web, this will enable you to extract those annotations into your vault. So what's going on here? The main getting started note will explain a lot of things, but here's the logic of my notes, right? You keep 3 kinds of notes. 3, the number is 3. You keep a reference note. That's just the citation, maybe a bit of an overview, the kind of thing you could build an annotated bibliography from. If you've got Zotero, you can drag and drop things in. There are more complicated ways of making Zotero play nice with Obsidian. I would suggest you leave that well enough alone until you get things under your belt. There are literature notes, and I'm using Aaron's nomenclature here. And this is what caused me a lot of confusion and why I lost a lot of 2021, because I couldn't get my head around what the hell literature notes are. Literature notes are just the observations from the readings written in my own notes, my own words. That's all it is. It's not complex. It's just a paraphrase. But because I'm lazy and I had an iPad, I was highlighting stuff and then getting the highlighted text to come into Obsidian and trying to pretend that that was a note. No. Direct quotations are not notes. They can be helpful, they can be part of a note, but they're not notes on their own. You got to do the rewrite. You got to do that little bit extra. Notes are writing. And then make your literature note link back to the reference note. And then in the argot of these things, permanent notes. And again, permanent, I couldn't get my head around that. The permanent notes, that's just the Shawn note. That's just the me. That's just the, hey, this is my bright idea. This is the light bulb, right? So these are my own thoughts. So when I'm reading a whole bunch of stuff and I have a thought like, oh, I wonder why that's the case, if that's the case. Well, that's the permanent note. Why is this the case? So I write my thought and I link that to the literature note that prompted. So now I have this chain of citations to observations to thoughts. And then when I'm feeling stumped and I'm not feeling inspired, or I don't know what to work on, I can go back and read my thoughts and think, hey, that kind of connected to that thing I read a moment ago, and I make a link. Making links in Obsidian is a very crucial thing. And to make a link, you 2 square brackets, start typing. If the note exists, it will appear, you hit enter, boom, you've made a link. If the note doesn't exist, keep typing, close the link with square brackets. And then when you click on that link, it will generate a new note. So reference notes, observations from reading, my own inspirations, link them. That's all there is to it. I hope that felt like a big aha moment for you all. This is a screenshot from my RA vaults where I've actually taken a note. And the template that I'm using here is courtesy of Andy Roddick, who also is using Obsidian with his anthropology students. And Andy and I have been having long conversations, and I really appreciate his generosity and willingness to talk and share and bounce ideas around. That's also another nice little feature of Obsidian. Say you know that you always want your note to follow the same pattern. Well, you make a note with that pattern and insert text here, insert observation here, try to link here, and you keep that note in its own little file. In the settings for Obsidian, you designate that folder, that subfolder with that template in it as the source for your templates. Then you can use Obsidian's hotkey to insert a template into any note you've got. And in that way, you have that consistency. So it's a really handy thing. And that was what I did with my class last term. I gave them an empty vault with templates about how I wanted them to record their process when they were trying to do digital work, and how I wanted them to record their thinking when I wanted them to connect the readings to the act of doing that digital work. So a single vault with 2 templates shared with 60 students. And at each submission date, they could just copy the note into a Dropbox for my class. And that regularity did wonders for the quality of their thinking. But a lot of the students also started on their own, without my prompting, using this approach with their other classes, taking notes in the same vault that I gave them for my class. And so their thinking from their other classes started bleeding into my class. Well, hell, that's what I want. That has been super, super, super helpful, because you can give a template in the course, the learning management system, and it's a Word doc, and you say, here, use this. But it's not the same. And it's not the same because the documents in Obsidian and the ability to see linkages or not, or to see notes that use similar phrases, which implies a link, is such a critical thing, right? It's an environment. A learning management system is only an environment in the same way that a prison cell is an environment. It's all about observation. Yeah, I don't like learning management systems. You heard it here first. I don't use Carleton's learning management system because, there's enough cop shit in the world. So I don't use it. I roll my own. All you friggin' well need is a WordPress page, and you too can have your own course system. We don't need the learning management system. Learning management system. Okay, this isn't a talk about learning management systems. Down with learning management systems. So here's a note in progress. Okay, this note, I've linked it back to the reference note, and I use the @ sign, which is a BibTeX convention, to indicate a note that is a reference. And this note is not a good note because this note has more than one thought in it. This note has pulled some of my observations from the text. It hasn't linked to the proper observations yet, and it's integrating some of my own thinking, right? So this is a note from this is a refugee from a previous system that I used, and which I am now pulling into the system, the vault that I've shared with all y'all, that I need to break apart into smaller pieces that then interlink. And one of the things that I really, really love about working with Obsidian is the way that I am never confronted with the terror of the blank page. There is always something in there. So if I have a thought and I'm thinking, you know what, I really wonder if there's a connection between how people buy and sell human remains and put them on display and the emergence of the ethnographic museum in the way that Dan Hicks talks about it in the Brutish Museums, which you all should totally read. So I look through my notes for Brutish Museum, Dan Hicks, Instagram, Bone Trade, and I start finding notes that are of interest. Well, in Obsidian, you can embed an entire note or a block of text from a note into a new note. So I find the notes that I want. I create a new note. I embed the bits that I want through links. So I don't actually have to copy and paste text. I just have to provide the link reference. And then Obsidian shows me all in one spot. And then you just have to write the connecting text around it and copy it into Word for, typesetting, that sort of thing. For me, this is a really powerful way because it shows my thinking to myself. And some days it's just really hard to get started. And if you have a blank page in front of you, that is the worst. With a system for thinking in, you never have that blank page. And this is what that kind of looks like. Hopefully you can see this little video. This is me. I'm searching for a note about how photographs evoke memory. And right now the link will do the entire note. But if I go back in and use the little circumflex character, I don't know what you call that in English, it will let you page through the note to find the block of text you want and then make a reference to it. So then I've got 2 notes now embedded. I write the introductory text there, blah, blah, blah. I put in some connective tissue, yada, yada, yada. big reveal's coming, folks. Concluding material. And then you click on the glasses at the top. Boom, it's all there. And you can copy and paste that into a PDF or into Word. You can use a Pandoc plugin to export it to something else if you want. In this little video, here I've got the hypothesis template installed. Now, this is a little bit more complicated than the previous kind of template that I talked about, because to go and grab something from the web, you need a bit of JavaScript. Because Obsidian is an Electron app, which really means it's kind of like a pseudo browser interface. So if you can do something on the web, you can make the plugin that does it. So if you can if you do any web programming, you can expand Obsidian. Anyway, all that to say, the hypothesis plugin is a JavaScript file that you make as a note in your vault. And then with the templater plugin, which is very difficult to say, you tell it to run that JavaScript, and it'll say, well, which thing do you want? And you say hypothesis. The plugin will prompt you for your hypothesis API, your developer key, which you get from your user page. You put that in, and then it says, okay, well, what page do you want to grab the annotations from? You give it the URL, boom, it drops it into your note. And I use hypothesis with a private group where I'm the only member, so I can make annotations all over the web that only I can see. And then this lets me grab those and bring them into my notebook. There are other ways. If you use Readwise, they have a commercial plugin that integrates with their whole ecosystem. But again, I really strongly suggest not getting into the weeds on plugins until you have a handle of how you want to use this thing. Because I'm not, this isn't the right way or the best way or the way thou all shalt must use because Shawn said so. It's just the way that seems to work for me right now. And again, this is just to show you that vault that I shared with you all, that's this with a few more subfolders in it just to keep things organized for my own brain. When you make a link in Obsidian, you don't need to give it the folder path. It will find the note. So folders are only there for your own visual convenience. So that's worth remembering. And if in a month's time, like clockwork, I get attracted by squirrel, the latest digital thing, these notes can migrate there, no problem, because they're just text files I control. So here is my current elaboration of the demo vault that I shared with all of you, which I made 2 weeks ago when I said to Jada that, yes, I would do this. I've got my notes colored by the different kind. You can see me as I put stuff into the system here. And what's nice here, you can see clusters are emerging, and the clusters are emerging around the permanent notes, the notes that are the Shawn originals. And I look at that and think, oh, geez, what's that cluster all about? And I can jump into that cluster, right? So this ability to visualize, lots of people don't like the graph. You don't have to use the graph. I'm coming out of network analysis. I love the graph. I use it, it lets me jump in, jump out, see the connections, see how things go. I think in this video, I click through to just show that you do in fact get to a note. No, I guess I didn't do that. But okay, I said don't go and use any plugins. Well, go use this one. This plugin is quite useful. It's called Journey. And it uses the graph, but it doesn't require you to look at the graph. What it does is it finds the shortest path between two notes and then enables you to copy the link to those notes into a new note so that you can start writing around it. And maybe the shortest path isn't the way you want to get to see how your notes connect. So you can go into it and you can specify to take the scenic route. And it uses a bit of graph analysis that I can go into if anybody's interested to figure that out. Basically, it looks at the degree of the vertex anyways, doesn't matter. The point being that it is a way of fostering serendipity and seeing how your notes, your thinking is emerging, right? Structuring your thoughts. I love the Journey plugin. It gives me pause for thought. And isn't that what we really want? I'm wrapping up now, folks. And I read Eleanor Connick's Obsidian Roundup every Saturday morning when it comes out. Eleanor is an author interested in ancient history, a community mod in the Obsidian Discord, which is really a useful resource, the Obsidian Fora as well. Check it out. There's always something interesting and inspiring, and it's a huge service that she does, and I have profited from it greatly. But again, start small, play with the demo vault. In your own practice, just try and keep one note per thought and separate your observations from what you read or do from your inspirations, but connect the two. And then have fun with it, right? You do interesting work. It's cool. Being able to see that at one step removed reflected back to you. I don't know about you, but that does wonders for my mental health, because otherwise I'm angry all the time. And on that note, that's where I am. And where are you? And thank you, Jada, for the opportunity to finally get my arse in gear and get my notes into something that's more useful.
Thank you. Like when I said before that this was quasi therapy, I mean, it kind of was. Just the way you talk about notes being it's so true. I don't think about my notes being an environment and that a place that I should want to be in. I never want to be in my notes for the very reasons you explained. I hate my notes. So I'm gonna probably rewatch this video a lot. We do have some questions. So their first two are just comments that agreeing that academia is so ableist. So I love that you started with that story that allowed us to think about the ways in which the environments we work in and teach in create disability for individuals.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, there's no excuse for it now.
Yeah.
If there are these machines can do so many things. And I mean, don't get me started on academic publishing and ebooks that are deliberately broken so that you have to use some piece of shit Elsevier product to try and read things. Like,
yeah.
Anyways,
You
I have a soapbox I jump up on it occasionally. It's just over there in the corner. It makes me feel better.
Place to do it.
Yeah.
We have you've made somebody's day about your anti-learning management system.
Freaking hate the LMS.
All right, and some questions are coming up. So have you ever been surprised by the clustering in the graph or the journey between two notes? Connie's curious to hear about the serendipity that might help you see new connections that might inform your work.
Right. I'm surprised all the time. And if you read Terry Pratchett, there's a book called The Thief of Time that has a character called Wen, the perpetually surprised, who said, because you are surprised, the only way you should react with that is with joy. Anyways, I'm often surprised by the way the clusters start emerging. Like as I make the notes, I expect clusters to emerge around an author, but it's in Obsidian's discovery tools afterwards. So there's a panel of forelinks and backlinks. So things that your note links out to and other notes that link back to your note. But it also does some very basic searching, so that if I write a note and I talk about the British Museum, and there are other notes that use the same phrase, it will bring those up and I can see how things work. In an earlier iteration, I even have a Python script that will do a bit of TF-IDF and topic modeling on my notes and generate connections that way, which is cool, but it sucks me too much into the whiz-bang tool rather than actually thinking through the connections. So I've stopped using it. But when I look at the connections And like Journey will suggest these notes interconnect somehow, and it's just looking at the linkages. So I've made the link. So at some point I saw a connection between note 1 and note 2, but that particular path through it is often quite curious. And so if I go back and I read those notes and say, okay, well, I will assume that there is some overarching connecting thread that pulls these notes together. What is it? And that's where the surprise emerges. And sometimes it might be that there are one thread ends and a new thread begins. It's like there's almost two broad meta topics that connect. And that's interesting to know. And sometimes it's just one topic. And sometimes it's just, sometimes things just happen to get connected up, and it's just a series of disparate, broken things. But if I look at a series of disparate, broken things from a perspective that maybe there is a connection that unites everything, well, that's a prompt to thought, right? So it becomes, that's where the serendipity comes from. That's where the surprise comes from. And I love that feeling.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions here that I'm going to group together because they're just wanting a little bit more explanation or a re-explanation of the difference between literature notes and reference notes and observation notes and permanent notes.
Right. If I was any good, I would have Obsidian on this machine and I could just look at it. So a reference note can be, okay, this is not gospel. This is not best practice. This is just how Shawn is currently doing things. Your mileage may vary. My reference note is just the citation stuff and sometimes a bit of a précis about the larger article. That's all it is. Just in this article, Sarah Perry talks about enchantment as a motivating force that could transform how we do archaeology. Boom. That's the sort of thing you might have in a literature review, right? But then if I go through Sarah's article and I note the point where she talks about how a crisis mode approach to archaeology, everything's being destroyed, we got to dig it all up before the bulldozers come through, means that archaeology becomes sort of like something that's good for you. We should only do it because it's being destroyed. So and she contrasts that with what an enchantment perspective might bring. So the literature note from Perry S 2019 might be on page 7. Perry says a crisis mode approach to archaeology means that we are always in a reactive mode. So it's my summary of a major thought or a major plank in the argument that seems important to me. And then I look at that and I think to myself, okay, what does a crisis mode imply for how we talk about archaeology on social media? That question is my note. That's my contribution to what I'm thinking about. That's a good thought. I'm going to keep that permanently. So it becomes a permanent note. I don't like the word permanent. I think I might just call them SG notes or something, but that's how roughly, that's my understanding of how Aaron's describes their approach to implementing Nicholas Luhmann's approach. And you can see, there's lots of different ways of doing this. Once you start Googling this, once you start jumping down some of the rabbit holes, you will be overwhelmed with, this is how you should do it. So the important thing is to think about, what do you want it to do? And how do you think about things?
Yeah.
Some people might get a lot of mileage out of, there's a workflow where you have an iPad, you have a PDF reader, you highlight things, and you've got your own kind of code for what's important and so on. You can connect that to Zotero, and you can use the MD Notes plugin for Zotero to extract those annotations. You can connect that MD Notes plugin to Obsidian so that those extractions go into your notes. And maybe that's all you need. Maybe that works for you. The question is the important question, I think, is this an environment I want to spend time in? does this make me think differently?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little follow-up on that are the permanent notes and literature notes distinct pages, or the template has different sections in it?
Well, you can do it however you like. So for me, I create separate notes and I have separate templates. However, you could have a single page and you could have at the top of it the reference. You could have next out of it important observations. You could have at the bottom of that my interpretations. And you could interlink all that stuff. If that works for you, then have at it. However, maybe you try that for a while and you discover that, no, this isn't really working. It would be an enormous pain in the butt to try and go back through and cut and paste and rearrange things. Obsidian can do that for you. Yeah. Part of its core functionality is a thing called the note composer, which allows you to either merge notes together, or you could highlight a subsection and say, extract this to its own note, and it pushes it out and leaves just a link. And maybe that's not a bad way of doing it, because you could take that original note with those different kinds of things in it, reference, literature, thoughts, extract the different parts out into their separate notes so that they can recombine with other things. But because that leaves a link back to the original, you still have that source note where everything first emerged from. And maybe that's a workflow that works for you. I like having the one idea, one note kind of thing, because in a way, your notes start getting away from you and they start intermingling with other things, and they start I like the way that things emerge out of network structures. That's been a theme in a lot of my research for years, that if we have things that interact at one level of complexity, the things that emerge out of them are very different. And it works for me.
Okay. I have a couple comments that I'll read out and give you some time for water if you want some. We have a thank you for Megan Meredith Lowe. And yes,
Meredith.
Burn the LMS.
Burn it to heck.
Yeah. Not a question, but a thanks from a fellow DHer, Sandra Sawchuk. I completely lost 2020 to Doom Emacs and
oh God.
Org so thanks for sharing details on your own quest. Thank you. I'm also grateful for the recognition of ableism in academia and excited about new tools from Leda May. And let's get back up to your next question. Since you've mentioned use of students with disabilities, do you have any idea of how Obsidian does in terms of screen reader navigability?
That is an excellent question. And the answer is, I do not know.
Okay.
I am actually going to write that down though, because that is something that I need to figure out.
And I can put that in a note where this, so while you're writing that down, we have a question of where we can access the recording. Should Dr. Graham agree, we will post it on our YouTube channel. And you can access that through dhsite.org. As we go through the session where the DH Toolbox sessions are described, I provide a link to the YouTube video, and I can provide links there to update. So if you find out anything about screen readers, I can put a little note with the description. I
will totally look that up. That seems to be something that I expect there would be discussion in the Obsidian Discord space or on its fora. So I will look that up. That is a really good question. Thank you.
Okay. And I guess I would also say, if you're not following us on YouTube, Twitter, we do, once the videos are on YouTube, I always post them so we can keep the conversation going there if you want. I love this question. How do you mitigate potential bias embedded in note-taking that may lead to a conclusion you want to see?
Right, so confirmation bias. And actually, Aaron's in their book has a very long discussion about this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And part of it emerges if I can summarize that when you're reading like this, when you're engaging with stuff, you're not necessarily asking, where's the information that will support the thing that I'm trying to prove, right? Which is what we do, and which is what a lot of our students do when we give them a topic that they have to write on. It's rather, what are the things that will enter into conversation with this? Because the focus on linking and relationship building is a really powerful structuring force in this approach. And that speaks directly to that issue, because you're putting things in conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's my understanding of what Aaron's says. And so, yeah.
You got a yes, thank you to that one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so hi Shawn, lots of awesome insights. Thank you. Do you still ever use Scrivener to separate out discrete writing projects, or is everything in Obsidian now? I'm trying to decide if I should go all or nothing as a current Scrivener devotee.
Good question. There is a plugin for Obsidian called Longform that enables a Scrivener-esque approach, but I like Scrivener. I like how Scrivener, again, focuses on that kind of atomic rearrangement of thoughts, but it's at a different level, right? Like a note is one thought, one note, but Scrivener is more units of ideas. So when I did the enchantment book, I wrote it largely in Scrivener by pulling together my different notes and then dumping them in larger sort of meta units. I wouldn't say dump Scrivener. The long form plugin is kind of neat. It's still a bit rough around the edges. It's worth looking at. But for my workflow as it currently sits, this approach really helps me with the reading and thinking beforehand. And of course, we all know that when you're putting a book together or a longer piece, that's a different kind of thinking still. I think the two things can work in concert with one another. And I mean, you can get Scrivener to read a folder of Markdown documents as separate cards. So, I mean, you could, if you wanted to, marry the two that way. I'm not sure what would happen or where the pitfalls might be, but I mean, that's the kind of thing I like to do and break things. Yeah.
Awesome. You got to thank you for that. For the very tech resistant who find any kind of program like this intimidating to start using, are there other workshops available for Obsidian, looking for something that can hold my hand and walk me through setting it up a little bit more?
That's a good question. The first thing, I mean, Obsidian's help files right off the bat are pretty, like Jada, you started with Obsidian just
2 days ago.
2 days ago.
Yeah.
Did you start with the help vault or did you just jump right in?
I ignored your advice and I went to there was a 7-minute video and I was very frustrated. As you remember, I messaged you and I was like, it's the person giving the video says that I can just add 2 brackets and create my link, and it's not creating the new note for me. And like the simple, press command and then do it, that was sort of needed. So I now regret not going to a help file first, because everything I needed to know was there. And that particular video was, I guess, good for helping me, understand what it looked like and what it could do, but the sort of how to do this was missing for me.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, the nice thing is there's nothing you can break, right? So, and the help file, the help vault really does walk you through a lot of the basic concepts. I kind of think that the best thing you can do is just play. Download the thing, turn it on, click on the help vault, and then just read through it and explore and, click and read things. and get a sense of that first. And this is always the problem with technical stuff, because there's always these hidden assumptions about a person's familiarity level and knowing how things ought to, like command click or whatever. And it's a perennial problem, and it's really hard to create good tutorials that are fully accessible to people from all sorts of backgrounds. I would not suggest jumping into the whole videos and the different blog posts, the enthusiasts yet, because that will be overwhelming and kind of kill any curiosity you might have. I just download it, open that help vault, have a look around, start trying to make a couple of notes, just give yourself permission to play with it and for it to not work. Because it's not anything inherent in you. It's just a function of experience, right? So play around. People can always send me emails if they want. I'm happy to help out. And then I think if I'm any good, I actually did in the vault that I created for everybody have quite a long sort of walkthrough, but also some links to some videos. Just remember that there's a difference in a card between the glasses icon for previewing and the pencil icon for actually editing. Because if you have preview on, then you can just click because it's really just like a web page. But if you have the editing on, you have to use the command click sort of thing. But yeah, play, muck about, give yourself permission to just let it be, and that things are going to be, there's nothing you can break.
Perfect. I apologize in advance. My puppy has decided she would like to get out of her cage, but she's going to stay there a little bit longer. So you might hear a little bit of whining. So this is actually an invitation, really. Connie says, I feel like every time you speak at UO, we always say, hey, we should have Shawn back to talk sometime about that thing he just mentioned in passing. Our students do not like the surveillance of LMS and invigilation software, and feeling observed doesn't help with learning, which is what we're here for. Would you come back to talk about best practices to take the surveillance out of classes in the digital age?
I can't talk about best practices. I can only talk about the crap that I try. I think best practices are go hand in glove with surveillance. So I want to hear about non-best practices. I want to hear about guerrilla practices. I want to hear about things that busted up. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk sometime.
Maybe this could be a really fun, good call on best practices, thank you. Maybe this could be a fun round table at DH site in May.
Sure.
You get a bunch of people coming and talking about their tactics that are not best practices.
Yeah, against best practice.
Yeah, that's what we call it.
An individual and humane digital humanities.
Yes, I love that. Okay.
Burn it all down.
We'll chat about all of that outside of Zoom. A few more questions here, and I think this will be our last three so that everyone can have a Zoom break. Is Obsidian worth it for those of us who have reading issues and therefore need more time to read and write and may tend to write shorter notes?
I think it could be quite useful. Most of my notes, the nice thing about Obsidian is that it works well on mobile devices as well.
Oh, great.
And for instance, I have a Mac and an iPad, so I put my Vault in the iCloud folder, and both things are available. I don't think a note should really be anything. You shouldn't have to scroll to read a note. Right. It should be like, for me, I find it just, if it fits in the frame, then that's great. If it's starting to get long and I'm starting to have to scroll, well, maybe that's a sign that I've got too much going on. So very short bits and bobs, I think that works great. I think that's a good way to do things. So I would assume that it would work for you, but really you just kind of have to give it a try and see. And if it doesn't, there are other things out there. I mean, I started by talking about NV Alt by Bert Tepstra. And I looked on his website the other day, and he's got a new thing coming out that builds on that, but also kind of integrates a lot of this sorts of stuff. So that's something to keep an eye on. And I mean, there's so much activity in this space at the moment. Everybody and their uncle seems to be building a note-taking app. But really, it just comes down to a series of little files. And that's all you really need.
Yeah. Does your workflow include other kinds of files like PDFs?
Right. So I do a lot of reading on PDF. I'm trying to figure out the best way to make that work. There are plugins for Obsidian that will let you annotate a PDF within Obsidian. They're a bit wonky because, I mean, Obsidian's only been around for a year and a half. So they haven't even reached version 1 yet, I think. And, you know, if the Obsidian people went away and the product stopped getting developed and the company collapsed, you'd still have a file filled with really interesting, useful notes. But PDFs, if the PDF is online and I can read it in a browser, then I use the Hypothesis to Obsidian workflow that I illustrated. If it's on a device, I can annotate it with like PDF reader or, you know, liquid text or something like that. And then those notes I will dump into, I call it the inbox. It's a folder in Obsidian of things that I got to break apart or elaborate on or add metadata to or whatever. So those kinds of annotations go in there until I'm in the right headspace to deal with them. You will find lots of blog posts about Zotero to Obsidian integration or PDF to Zotero. Those things can get really complicated really quickly, and you end up wasting a lot of your life trying to find the one perfect flow. So I'm kind of thinking, you know, just do things in small chunks.
This might lead well into the last question, which is how many tags is too many? Do you have strategies? I'm always nervous I'll need a tag in the future, so I go overboard just in case.
Not using tags. Tags are a kind of link, right? Yep. Conceptual link. So I'm trying to just link notes to each other. I did mention tags earlier. But what I'm meaning there is that so I have, for instance, a bunch of notes. I'm looking at them and I'm thinking a lot of these notes kind of speak to the idea that people trading human remains are making their own museum. So I made a note, called it the DIY Museum. And I put into it that very thing I just said. It seems like people are trying to make their own version of the ethnographic museum. Then on Obsidian, on notes that seem to speak to that, I add that as a link to it. Tagging, you can use lots of different tags, but then you end up becoming, you know, making sure that everything's capitalized consistently or that you've used the same word all the time. And I have used tags in my 2021 version of trying to think this all through. And the only tag that was ever really interesting there was #SG, which I was using for, oh, this is an interesting thought. The rest of them just kind of cluttered everything up. But then that's me. If you have a more disciplined approach to using tags, you can certainly do it in Obsidian. They just become a kind of link. They're helpful for searching.
Right. Thank you so much, Shawn. That was our last question. And in the chat, I put the link to register for our next session, which is with Anton Ninkoff, who's a postdoctoral fellow here at the School of Information Studies with Stephanie Haustein. And he'll speak about accessing, analyzing, and visualizing research data through DataCite. I can't spell, apparently. I put DataCit. And Jupyter Notebooks, link to register. And I want to end on this thought as my pup winds us to conclusion. A thought from somebody who popped a comment into the Q&A. We should go ahead and fail gloriously.
Absolutely. Fail gloriously, tell other people what you did, because that's, you use your position, whatever it is, to make it easier for the next person so that they don't have to suffer.
Yeah.
Because academia is shitty enough as it is already, right? So let's
not
add to it.
Exactly. Thank you, Shawn. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We had a great crowd, great questions. For anyone who didn't hear what I said earlier, we post everything to YouTube on our YouTube channel, but we link to it through dhsite.org. And of course, we'll let you know on Twitter. So there are multiple ways to keep track of this session if you want to go back and rewatch it, probably by the weekend. So have a great rest of your week, everyone, and we'll see you back here 2 weeks from now, whatever date that is, February 16th, for our next session. Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.